In this video, we will go over Mastery 11, and I will go over some practice problems that you will see on Delta Math, and then as well as when you do your Mastery test. So the topics we are going to do is solve by factoring, solve by completing the square, and solve by quadratic formula. So the first one we're going to work on is solve by factoring, and our problem here is x squared plus 6x minus 63 equals 4x. I wrote down all the steps for you guys. So first one is just to ensure that our equation is in standard form. And notice that this isn't standard form because this 4x is completely on the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this 4x over. And then I'm going to rewrite my equation. So I have x squared minus or plus 2x minus 63, and then equals to 0. So I'm going to factor my equation next, and then these are the numbers that go in the following places. And then in order to find the numbers on the side, you have to make sure that the two numbers multiply to give us negative 63, but at the same time add to give us a positive 2. So the numbers that I would think of here is a 9x and a 7x, but I know one of them has to be negative, and I'm going to choose the 7 to be negative so that when I get so that I could get positive 2. So I'm going to throw those back in. And then I'm going to find the numbers on the outside. So I know this is negative 7, this is 9, and I have x, and then I have x. So after I get my factors, I know my factors are going to come from the outside of my box. So here are my factors. And then in order to solve for the solution, that just means like solve for x, I'm going to use the zero product property. So I'm going to take both of my factors, set it equal to 0. And then solve. So I'm going to minus 9 on both sides. So one solution I have is x equals to negative 9. Another solution I have is I'm going to get x equals to 7. Okay, so when you write it in the answer, this is how I would write it. I would put negative 9 comma 7 and then submit your answer from there. All right, so the next one we have is something called completing the square, and there are two types of questions here. So the first one is telling us to put our equation into a certain format, and it's not telling us to solve or anything. So in order to put it in that format, which we call perfect square form, we're going to use our algebra tiles. Okay, so first off, we want to make sure that we format equations so that ax squared and bx are on one side and the constant is on the other side. So I'm going to highlight, this is ax squared and this is the bx, and ideally they should be on the same side with each other. And then you'll see why I do that in a second. Okay, so I'm going to move that one on the other side, keep the negative 37 by itself. So if I were to move things around, this is the actual equation that I'm going to be working with. Okay, all right, so this is my equation right now. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw algebra tiles to represent my box. So what I mean is that I'm going to have this box, and then I eventually need to complete the square. Okay, and then I know that negative 37 is on the other side. So I have x squared in my tile. Take this 16x and then divide it in half to get 8x on both sides. And then if you want to label the outside to figure out what should I fill into this extra space in order to complete my square, and that's going to help me. So I have 8 times 8, which is positive 64. So if I add 64 on one side, I'm going to add 64 on the other side. And then last but not least, write the equation in perfect square form. So the perfect square form of this is x plus 8, which, if you guys notice, comes from the outside here, and then equals 2, and then I'm going to simplify these two values. So 64 minus 37 is going to give me 27. Okay, don't forget the square, and then I'm going to put that into my answer like so. Okay, so for the very last problem, or I mean second to last problem, sorry, is to complete the square. So notice that our equation is in the format that we just looked at. We have it in perfect square form and it equals to something, and then it just says to solve for x, and then put it in its most simplest form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for x basically by getting x by itself. So I'm going to rewrite my equation down here so I can work with it. And then the first thing I have to do is actually cancel the square up here. And the only way to cancel a square is to actually square root both sides. So the next thing I'm going to do is square root both sides. So the square root and the square cancels, and then I get x plus 2 equals just the square root of 10. But notice there's typically a positive and negative in front of the square root of 10. That's what happens when we square root numbers. And then I am going to end off by subtracting 2. So I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. That cancels. And then I'm going to clean up my problem. So I have x equals negative 2. I'm just going to put that first so that the plus or minus could be in the middle, and then the square root of 10 last. And it says to be in simplest form. I can't really do anything with the 10, so I'm going to leave it like so. All right. And then last problem is to solve with the quadratic formula. The equation says a squared minus 7a plus 12 equals to 0. So the first thing you want to do is just ensure that your equation is in standard form. And what I'm seeing now is it is. So our ax squared is right here, our bx is right here, and then our c value is here. So we're all good. We also want to find the a, b, and c value. So our a value typically is in front of the x squared. So here we have 1. And then our b is negative 7. So notice I'm taking the negative with the 7, and then c is 12. So after you do that, you're going to take your a, b, and c and then plug it into the quadratic formula, which you see is written for you. And then my goal is just to plug those values in and simplify as much as possible. So first is negative b, so I'm going to put negative 7 plus or minus the square root of b squared, so I have another negative 7, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 12, all over 2 times a, which is 1. So the next step is I'm just going to simplify. So I will go this way. So 2 negatives right here makes a positive. So I'm going to put a 7 and then plus or minus. And then I have 7 squared, which is 49. And then I have negative 4 times 1 times 12, which gives me negative 48. And then I'm going to divide that all by 2 times 1, which is 2. And then moving on, I have, maybe I'll just start on the next. I have this right here. I have 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 minus 48, which is 1. And then divide that all by 2. And then I'm going to keep going. So I have 7 plus or minus the square root of 1 is 1. And I'm going to divide that by 2. And notice how I keep dividing by 2 because you can't forget about it. And then that finally gives me actually 2 equations to deal with. So my first one is x equals 7 plus 1 divided by 2. And if I were to simplify that, that's 7 plus 1 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So that's one of my answer. And then my second one is going to be x equals 7 minus 1 divided by 2. And then 7 minus 1 is 6. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the answer that I'm going to put into here is 4, 3. Okay, because I have 2 answers. So that's pretty much it for the review. So we have factoring, completing the square, and quadratic formula.